Hello everyone, welcome to Diplomatic Briefing. After China and the US reached a trade consensus, Foreign Minister Wang Yi spoke with US Secretary of State Blinken by phone, likely to finalize preparations for the leaders' meeting. Wang Yi said China-US relations shape the world's direction, and a stable, healthy, sustainable relationship serves both countries' long-term interests and meets the international community's expectations. President Xi and President Trump are both world-class leaders who have had long-term interactions and mutual respect. This has already become the most valuable strategic asset in China-US relations. Recently, there were new setbacks in China-US economic and trade relations, but through the economic and trade talks in Kuala Lumpur, both sides clarified their positions, enhanced mutual understanding, and reached a framework consensus on resolving the current urgent economic and trade issues on an equal footing. Wang Yi emphasized that this once again proves that as long as both sides fully implement the important consensus reached by the two heads of state, by upholding the spirit of equality, mutual respect and protection, and by insisting on resolving conflicts through dialogue while abandoning the practice of exerting pressure at every turn, it is possible to stabilize and move the bilateral relationship forward. We hope that both sides will move toward each other, make preparations for high-level China-US interactions, and create conditions for the development of bilateral relations. The statement quoted Rubio as saying that China-US relations are the most important bilateral relationship in the world, and that he looks forward to sending a positive signal to the world through high-level interactions. From Wang Yi's remarks to Rubio, it is clear and positive that the two heads of state meeting in Korea will happen naturally. What is particularly noteworthy is that in the published remarks by Wang Yi, he repeatedly emphasized the need for China and the US to resolve current economic and trade issues on an equal footing. The word equal carries a lot of weight in today's global landscape. When Trump suddenly imposed high tariffs on the world, developed Western economies like the EU and Japan all bowed down to the US, only China responded with equal countermeasures. It was also only China that successfully forced Trump to resolve differences on an equal footing. After this episode, it is foreseeable that China's international standing will be further strengthened. Even before the meeting between the Chinese and US leaders, things haven't been going so smoothly for Trump. There hasn't been any significant progress in trade negotiations with ASEAN. The US military has stirred up trouble again in the South China Sea. The US Navy's Pacific Fleet reported that 2 US Navy aircraft crashed one after another in the South China Sea on the afternoon of the 26th. The personnel on board were rescued. According to the report, at around 2:45 p.m. on the 26th, an MH-60 Romeo Seahawk helicopter from the US Navy's Helicopter Maritime Strike Squadron 73 was involved. Took off from the USS Carl Vinson aircraft carrier to carry out a mission and crashed into the South China Sea. The 3 people on board were rescued. Then, at 3:15 p.m. on the same day, an FA-18F Super Hornet fighter jet from the US Navy Strike Fighter Squadron 22 also crashed into the sea while taking off from the aircraft carrier for a mission. Both pilots ejected and were rescued as well. At the Ministry of Foreign Affairs press conference, a Bloomberg reporter asked about a U.S. military helicopter and a fighter jet crashing separately in the South China Sea within less than 30 minutes. What is the Chinese Foreign Ministry's comment on this? Spokesperson Guo Jiakun first pointed out that China has taken note of the relevant reports and said that if the U.S. requests, China is willing to provide necessary assistance from a humanitarian perspective. Then he shifted the tone and emphasized that the U.S. military aircraft in question were in the South, crashed during military exercises. The U.S. frequently sends warships and military aircraft to the South China Sea to flex its military muscle, which is the root cause of maritime security issues and undermines regional peace and stability. Some mainland netizens suggested that the spokesperson could also add that due to the U.S. military's active deployment in the South China Sea and this recent aircraft crash, which has seriously affected the marine environment there, China lodges a protest and reserves the right to hold the U.S. military accountable for the damage caused to the South China Sea's marine environment. To briefly summarize the responsibility, first, if the US hadn't come all the way to stir up trouble at China's doorstep in the South China Sea, its military aircraft wouldn't have had an accident in these waters. Second, the U.S. military's aircraft carrier experienced 2 crash incidents in less than half an hour, which inevitably raises doubts about the U.S. military's combat capabilities. Third, when China responds that it can offer assistance if needed, it's not just empty talk. On January 24, 2022, a U.S. F-35C also crashed in the South China Sea. After a 37-day search, the wreckage was finally salvaged from a depth of 3,700 meters under the sea. At the time, the U.S. military confirmed that the final salvage operation was carried out by the professional salvage vessel Picasso, operated by a Singaporean company. However, Chinese media revealed that this ship was actually built by China Merchants Heavy Industry, Shenzhen Company, Limited. The news that a Chinese-made vessel had salvaged the F-35C became a hot topic online at the time. Before the face-to-face meeting between the Chinese and U.S. leaders, the Taiwan issue had already become a focal point. In particular, an article by Lyle Goldstein, the director of Asia engagement at the U.S. Defense Priorities think tank, made the authorities in Taipei even more nervous. Goldstein published an op-ed in Time magazine on October 23, titled, "The U.S. Must Beware of Reckless Leaders in Taiwan." The article pointed out that, with news about the Middle East war and the Ukraine conflict dominating the headlines, it is easy for people to overlook one fact. Taiwan is currently the most dangerous flashpoint in the world. If mainland China were to take action, it could trigger a confrontation between the US and China and even bring about the terrifying risk of nuclear conflict. Now, multiple factors are at play. This has made the situation in the Taiwan Strait even more unstable. The United States has intervened in Asian affairs many times in the past, and the results have never been good. Now it should act with extreme caution. The author points the finger at Lai Ching-te, saying that at the center of this escalating storm is Lai Ching-te, the leader of Taiwan from the Democratic Progressive Party. He is not low-key. On the contrary, in a series of speeches, he has openly promoted the idea of Taiwan as a nation, charging headlong toward Taiwan independence. This has led some media figures on the island to describe him as such. There has never been any leader of Taiwan who has expressed such a clear stance on Taiwan independence as Lai Ching-te. Gütersloh said that, as expected, mainland China reacted strongly to Lai Ching-te's remarks, accusing him of provoking more conflict and risk. The article then goes on to offer suggestions to the US government. The author believes that, compared to his predecessor, the current U.S. president is more cautious on the Taiwan issue, but some of his senior cabinet advisors, including the Secretary of Defense, are not. Some have taken an obviously hawkish stance, while Musk, who is seen as someone who understands China, is now keeping his distance from the White House. Gütersloh emphasized that, on the high-risk issue of Taiwan, the U.S. government should act with caution because Taiwan is a core interest of China, but not a vital national security interest for the United States. In light of this, American leaders should not hesitate to restrain the reckless and high-profile Lai Ching-te, or this could be done through private warnings. Gütersloh taught at the U.S. Naval War College for 20 years, with research areas including the Korean Peninsula, the South China Sea, the China-India border, and Taiwan, so-called critical flashpoints. In October this year, he published similar views on the Zhifu official website. His conclusion was that if the United States intervenes in the Taiwan issue, it would bring incredible risks to the U.S. Air Force and Navy, including the nuclear level, but the effect has been minimal. After this article was published in Time magazine, the Lai Ching-te administration became highly nervous. According to reports from Taiwanese media, their Foreign Affairs Department responded urgently on the 24th, stating that Taiwan's so-called commitment to maintaining the status quo has never changed, nor do they intend to provoke any tensions. They have always been committed to maintaining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait and promote their cross-strait policy with a steady, pragmatic, and rational attitude. As for this rebuttal, Goldstein did not forget to issue another warning. On October 25th, he posted on the X platform saying, "It seems that my recent article published in Time magazine." He sealed the loophole, saying they must understand that Uncle Sam will not come to their aid. Americans are already tired of getting involved in other people's family disputes and fighting endless wars. They are not going to risk going to war just to save a struggling Taiwan region. Especially when nuclear risks are involved, this is even more the case, and such a situation is almost certain to happen. One of America's most influential think tanks, RAND Corporation, also released a 115-page report on October 14th. The report calls for stabilizing US-China competition and for mutual compromise and understanding in the three areas most likely to trigger conflict: Taiwan, the South China Sea, and technological competition. The report also urges the United States to clearly state that it does not support Taiwan independence and supports China's gradual unification in order to avoid a sudden takeover of Taiwan overnight. Recently, several American think tanks have released similar reports expressing this view. Although the US will not abandon its use of Taiwan to contain China, Trump's attitude toward Taiwan is even more pronounced. Realism is all about pragmatism. In fact, before the US-China leaders' meeting, the PLA also increased its pressure on Taiwan. Recently, multiple units from the PLA Eastern Theater Command have carried out practical training exercises to test their capabilities in reconnaissance and early warning, air blockade, and precision strikes in key areas. In videos released by the PLA, you can see PLA fighter jets and bombers taking off, dropping bombs and explosions occurring on the ground. Meanwhile, CCTV News. Recently, the Jilin-1 satellite released several images, and under the satellite's view, every street in Taiwan is clearly visible. The images include famous Taiwanese landmarks such as Sun Moon Lake, Alishan, as well as places like Taipei City, Taipei Port, and Hsinchu Science Park. In the images, the streets at each location are all very clear. What's especially worth noting is that the Hsinchu Science Park is the core of Taiwan's semiconductor industry. The mainland's release of these images is quite